We added some lights to the scene. What we need to do now is create a camera and animate that camera moving in and out. That's it, okay? And then we're gonna render it out. All the stuff that we've done is all inside the software. So anyone who wants to see it, they have to have the software installed so they can see it. Or if you took a screenshot with your phone, you could do that too. So once I'm in Maya, I've not opened my file yet. I've just opened Maya and copied my preferences. I'm gonna go to File and do a Set Project. Okay, File and then Set Project. This is probably one of the most important things because when we start rendering our stuff, we have to make sure it goes to the right spot. So every day, File, Set Project, and then we can go to File, Open, or Control O, and go to our mini room. Okay, now every day when you come in, you should save as something else, okay? Sometimes you want to get in the habit too of even throughout class saving it as something else just so you have extra backups in there. The files aren't incredibly large, so it's not a huge deal to save as file 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. So I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As, and set this to be number 3. Okay, that way I know where I'm at. Now, I would also get in the habit, not for this assignment, but maybe the next one, is to start naming what step we're at. Because once I have 30 files, it's going to be hard to find out what step each one is. So as I do stuff, I may label things MinroomRendering 03. That way I know this is where I'm rendering. And if I'm lighting stuff, I would name it Lighting 02 or whatever the name is. Okay? So the biggest thing, find something that works for you. Find some way to keep your stuff organized. Staying with one file is not staying organized. Okay? I've seen too many people lose files that way. All right. So there we go. So I have my scene. I have some lights in there. I have some textures on here. And what I want to do is I want to create a camera so that we could actually render this out. Now, when we hit this render button up here, remember that one we played with last time? When we hit this, all it's doing is giving us a preview from wherever we're located. Okay? So right now I'm pretty far back in my scene. I framed it a bit, and that's what it's showing me is that viewport. But there's no animation here. Okay? I can't spin around it. I can zoom in and out, but that doesn't look like a 3D zoom. It just looks like it got bigger. So what we need to do is we have this perspective camera. So right now we're inside a perspective camera. I don't like to mess with this camera because I always like to model in my perspective window and then just have another camera set up that would actually be like a render camera, okay? So I'm gonna go to Panels, right up here at the top, Perspective, and make a new camera. So Panels, Perspective, New, and it's right here, Panels, Perspective, New. Okay? Once you make a new perspective, it should jump you out of that camera and put you into that new perspective. And we know it's a new one because it says down here, Perspective 1. Okay? So I'm going to rename my Perspective 1 because it also selects it for us. I'm going to call it Render Cam. Okay, so I just type in the outliner, Render Cam, and that way I know that this is my camera that I'm going to be rendering. Okay, so just so you can see that again, we went to Panels, Perspective, New, and then we went over here to Render Cam, or Perspective 1, and renamed it Render Cam. Now again, this also helps stay organized because in some scenes you might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 cameras. You need to know which one's going to be doing which thing. Sometimes you'll actually render out camera 1 for the first 100 frames, camera 2 for the next 200 frames, camera 3 for these frames, camera 5 does all those stuff. And then you'll cut it together just like you would an actual video inside of Premiere or After Effects or whatever. All right, so I want to render this out with an animation. Now what I need to do is see exactly what's going to render out, because if you look, let me just make this like a ridiculous size here just so we can see. All right. There we go. So if I take this and I render it, I've hidden it now. And that, there we go. So I'm going to render this out. And what we're going to see is that what I see in my viewport and what I'm rendering are two different things. They may just be slightly off, but they're still going to be off. They're not going to be as exact as I want them to be. Okay? So here, you can see I get my entire room, where in this one, you can see that the top left corner is cut off, and I can see the bottom in this. Okay? So Maya does not automatically size your stuff in the viewport as to what's going to render. Okay? Imagine that you had a bouncing ball and you want to put the bouncing ball right in the bottom of your frame. We have to set that stuff up in Maya to do that. Okay? So there's, yes sir. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on, there's this word show right here, and underneath the word show is this blue circle. And that turns on what's called the resolution gate. So right under the word show, you click that blue circle, and you should get this resolution gate that pops up. Okay, so click on that blue circle.
Where is it again?
Right under the word show, you see right there. Okay, that should pop up this resolution gate, and the resolution gate is actually what's going to render. So if I set this up so that my chair was just touching the bottom of this, when I hit the render button, my chair will touch just the bottom of that. That's exactly the framing of what's going to render inside my scene. So now what I want to do is just create a little animation on this. All right. So now for the animation to work, we have to have our time slider down here. Okay. And like I said before, Maya is very good at like stuff just disappearing or moving around or not being there anymore, or just, I don't know where that went. Okay, so if you lose your stuff, you can always go to Display, UI Elements, and then say Restore or Show all UI Elements. And that will bring everything back. Okay, let me fix my stuff here. Come on. There we go. All right. So display UI elements, and this is where all your stuff is. So if your time slider is gone, I can pull my time slider back by going to UI elements again and turning the time slider back on. Okay. Sometimes, depending on who was here before, sometimes the modeling class doesn't use preference or doesn't use the time slider, so they just won't have it on just because it saves space. Also, if you hit Control Spacebar, it does that and hides all your stuff, so you get nothing in your scene. So hit Control Spacebar again. All right. So I'm going to make sure I'm on frame 1. So my little ticker right here is on frame 1. On the far right side of this, it says 1. So I know that I'm on frame 1. So then I'm going to go and make sure that my camera is selected by clicking this button. See under View, there's a little picture of a camera. I click Select Camera, and I make sure that Render Cam is selected, and then I hit S. Okay, so I click the little picture of the camera right there. I make sure it says Render Cam or whatever I named mine, and then I hit S where I want my camera to start. Okay, so I want my camera to start right here, so I hit S at that point. Then I'm going to go up to 120. I'm going to, let's say, zoom in. Make sure my render cam is still showing here. Hit S again. And now I should have an animation of my camera just kind of moving around my scene. One of them is speed. So as I hit play, what this is doing is it's playing back as fast as it can play back. Okay? So if I don't have very much stuff in my scene, it could play back very quickly because there's not a lot of stuff going on. But the more stuff I have in my scene, the slower it's going to go. Now what we want to do is basically put a cap, say go as fast as you can, but don't go faster than actual real time. Because like in his case, it's freaking out. It's giving him a headache. So what we can do is we right click on the timeline and change our playback speed to play every frame maximum real time. Okay, and then what we should get is something that is closer to real time. Now keep in mind, because we're working in 3D, it's not going to always be real time. So we just have to use this as an estimate of how quick this actually is going, okay? When we get to further projects, we'll actually get into how do we see what it looks like in actual real time. All right, so this right now is 120 frames. We're going at about 24 frames per second. So this animation is 5 seconds long, okay? 120 divided by 24 is 5 seconds. All right, so that's how this is going. Now, a couple other things to pay attention to. When we first hit S, you saw over there in the channel box how everything turned red, okay, like a bright red. That means that we have a keyframe set on that frame for that object. When we advance our frame, you'll notice that it turns to kind of this like pinky salmon color. That means that that item has keyframes, but not on that frame, okay? We can see down here in the timeline a little red tick. That red tick means that's where your keyframe is, okay? So I have one keyframe here at 1 and one keyframe here at 120, all right? Further assignments will edit these keyframes a bit more. For now, we're just very simple. We're starting and we're going. My advice to you as anyone who ever uses anything digital is less is always more, okay? So usually what people like to do is show everything from every angle. So they're proud of their work and they'll say, okay, I want to show this chair that I worked on because I spent so much time working on that chair. So they zoom in, they really want to show this corner of the chair for some reason, and they'll set a key on the corner of the chair. Then they go to frame 60 and like, oh, that picture of the duck. Oh man, that picture of the duck. Or the dodo bird. I'm gonna show him. Yep. And I got time, so I got 90 frames here. I'm gonna show that cup handle. Spent about 10 minutes on that cup handle. And then this is what we end up with. Okay? This is not pleasing to the eye, especially because now that I've changed this, it's actually probably going a bit slower than it normally would. But I have had people turn stuff in like this thinking that it's okay, and it's not okay. All right? That first camera move that I had, where it was, let me delete those, going from point A to point B, that is perfect. That's exactly the kind of camera moves you want to have. All right? It's not until you've mastered these basic ones that you can then expand on them and try to do something fancy. All right? And for a lot of things, you have to keep in mind who the target audience is. For this, it's me, and I don't like those crazy camera angles. All right? This is very nice, okay? And what this does, as we come from a wide angle, we're further back, we're seeing more of the scene, and then we go into the scene, what that does to the viewer is it pulls the viewer into your piece. So it makes them actually like part of it. It makes them like excited, like, oh, what else is in the scene? Going the other way, it takes them out of the piece and makes them look at more of the big picture. So both can be effective ways to kind of help tell a story. I could have started this whole thing like really zoomed in here, like that, and then zoomed back out to show this massive room and all the other birds that are in the room that I've modeled or had pictures of or whatever. And that could be a good like reveal shot, right? Because you've seen those before in movies. So there's a lot of thought that goes into making camera moves. And you'll see too, like before I wrapped around the chair, this time I'm not wrapping around the chair. Now, if I wanted to, I could just go to frame 60 and just nudge this over, but I think it's gonna be maybe a little bit too involved, so we'll see. It's not too bad, but it does, you know, it's subtle and it works. There is a little bit of a pause in there, which I don't like. So I'm just going to remove it. Just delete. There we go. Okay. All right. So we'll play with more camera stuff later. My biggest thing is that we've set a couple keyframes. All right. So we've animated a camera. That's all we had to do in this spot. We may have animated objects too. And at this point, we would go through and we could animate those objects right on top of this. So if I wanted my monitor here just to rock back and forth, I could center pivot it first. And then rock this back and forth if I wanted to do that, but I don't want to do that. So now what I want to do is set this up to actually render out, okay? So I'm just resetting this just so I get all my stuff that was out. That's fine, that's fine. Okay, everything else is good. All right, so last time we looked at this eyeball up here, right? This little clapper with the eyeball on it. That's so that we can open up the render view. We played with that. This actually renders the thing out. This we're not going to play with right now. This next one, the one with the gear, that's the one we want to click on. So click the clapper with the gear. Okay, the clapper with the gear is our render settings. So this is all the stuff of what is going to render out. So the first thing we want to do is start right at the very top of this and say file name prefix. Every single thing that you have in this class should have your name in it. So we're going to name this, whatever your last name is. I'm going to put Sarcona underscore and then what the project is, mini room. So I put Sarcona underscore mini room. Now when this renders out, it's going to render out Sarcona underscore mini room as my file. Now when it renders, it's not going to render out a QuickTime movie. What it renders is individual frames. So it goes to frame 1 and renders that out. Goes to frame 2, renders it out. Goes to frame 3, 4, all the way up to 120 and renders out each one of those and saves them. So right now, if I scoot down a touch, you'll see where it says frame animation extension, and it just says single frame. So right now it's set up to be just a single frame, hit the button and you get one frame out. I have student work up here that I'm going to be posting in the hallways. These are all ones that were done with just single frame because that's all they needed was a still. But we're doing an animation, so we have to tell it we're doing an animation. So we're going to click on this, and this is going to be confusing, but we're going to click on the third one down, which is name.number.extension. So 1, 2, 3, name.number.extension. Okay? Now what that means is that when it renders out, it's going to render out with the name, Sarcona Mini Room. It's going to put a dot, like a period, and then it's going to have the number of the frame. So right now, if it were to render this, frame 1 would be called Sarcona Mini Room dot 1 dot, and then the extension, EXR. Okay? And then frame 120 would be dot 120 dot EXR. All right? That way it knows, or we know, which frame this item is. Now, there's other numbers here, other choices from this list. This is by far the most popular one. This one will work across most programs. Every one we're going to use, it's going to work for. If you get into the field, you may run across some random program that needs some other extension. If you choose any one of these other ones, After Effects may not read it. Okay? So that could be a problem because you could go through this whole process and then realize, oops, After Effects won't read it. I have to go back and rename 100 files or 120 files correctly. So make sure it's name.number.extension. The next thing is frame padding. With frame padding, look up here where this says, this is the example of what it's going to look like when it renders. See how it says 0001? If I scroll my frame padding down, do you see how we get less zeros at the beginning of this? Those zeros are padding. Okay, I can pull this up higher. I can pull this down further. Now the reason for this is that some softwares need frame padding. Some softwares need to know where frame 10 is, because to some softwares, if I went like, let me just go to Windows here, there, 2510, work, Tuesday, Thursday, images, oh, that's not anything in there. There we go. Nope. All right. I thought I had some on here. Oh, there we go. Just thinking. All right. So if I sort these by name here, so you see how this goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, that's the correct way that it should be reading them. But some softwares, what they will do is they will go with number 1. And then the next one logically to the computer is not 2, it's 10, because it's 1, 0. So that's how the computer would read it. And then it would go all the way to 19, and then it would jump back to 2. And then it would go to 20s, okay? So what the frame padding does is it eliminates that need. It just says 0001 is 1, and then 0002 is 2. It's just, that's the order. So default 4 is perfect. We can just leave it at 4. If for some reason you rendered more than 100 frame or more than 999 frames, then you would have to bump that up higher. Okay, 9,999. Yes, but typically it's not an issue. All right, so we're going to scroll down a bit more. The start frame is our start frame. Which frame are we going to start rendering on? Frame 1. Okay, we started at frame 1. And then what's our end frame? 120. Okay, that's it. 1 to 120. That's what we're rendering. Now going back to the camera discussion, if we had 30 cameras and we wanted to render this camera from this area and this camera from this area at different times, we could punch all those things in and render each camera differently. Okay. By frame we don't need to worry about, but if you want to render every third frame, you could say by every third frame here. We don't typically need to do that. All right, this is an important part, renderable camera. So which camera are we rendering? Render cam, or whatever you called yours. If you somehow have 2 cameras in the list, you can hit the trash can next to the other one. As in, this one is render cam in front. I can just trash can the front one, and now I'm just rendering through the render cam. Okay? A couple people in the Tuesday, Thursday class, they rendered out 2 cameras, or some of them rendered the wrong camera, and obviously the wrong camera has no animation on it, so it doesn't do anything. All right, down here is our image size. We render everything in this class at 960 by 540 for animations. The reason we do that is that it's big enough to look nice and to see the details, yet small enough to be somewhat quick. Okay, and by somewhat quick, it might be a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes a frame. There's nothing compared to if we rendered it at a bigger size. Okay, so 960 by 540, that's always the default unless you've changed it, so you just leave it. This is all we need to do for this tab. So just to go through the items we changed our name, always with our name in there. We changed the name.number.extension. We chose our start and end frame, and we adjusted our renderable camera. That's all we've changed inside here. Under, yes?
I don't have render cam in my option.
What'd you call yours?
Same thing.
There we go. All right, so now we're going to go to the quality tab. Okay? And under the quality tab, there's just one slider we have to deal with, which is the overall quality. We put this up to 2. That's it. Okay? For some things, you may need to pull it down or push it up. Go to 2 most times, and you'll be fine. Okay? So all of our graininess, if I jump back to my render view. So remember all the graininess that we had, wrong button, under here. Taking that slider up to 2 should fix all that stuff. Also, if you look at the edges here, look how choppy the edges are. It should fix most of that too. Okay? So now you're not going to render yours this way. I'm going to hit the render button on mine just so we can see what's going to happen. Now that we've adjusted our settings, what this is going to do is the only thing that is affected by what I've just done is that quality slider. Okay? This render button has nothing to do with that first common tab. Okay? That's something else that we'll get to in a second. But I want to see before I go to render, what is the quality going to look like? What is my framing going to look like? Now you'll see we still have some grain underneath here without entirely like destroying our render time. It's very difficult to get rid of every single piece of grain. Part of the issue with the grain being on here, and it's hard to see on the projector, is that I don't have a Mila material on that back wall. Okay, I believe it's just a flat Lambert, the default Lambert 1 that's on there, and that's causing part of that graininess. So once I assigned that to a Mila, that should clean up some of that stuff too. But you will see that a majority of this stuff has been cleaned up. Overall, this rendering looks a lot nicer. If I zoom in, you can see how that edge looks pretty clean now compared to what it was a second ago. All right, so now looking at this view, oh, that's what I wanted to make it brighter so you can see it. I'm going to blow it out. Looking at this view here, I can see how long this one frame took. Okay, it took 1 minute and 2 seconds to render. So how long is my full animation going to take to render?
2 hours.
2 hours. Okay, so this is a pretty low scene. It's going to take 2 hours. If I had 10 more things in my scene with higher res textures, and I had this is one picture of the dodo. If I had 30 pictures, all that stuff adds to that render time, okay? So we have to be aware of all that stuff throughout the entire process. So when you grab a picture from the internet and you use it and it's like this tiny on your screen, make sure you resize it inside of Photoshop so you don't use this huge image. Because even though this is a tiny image here, Maya still loads that huge image in order to render, okay? All right, so that's at 2, that's fine. Comment tab's good, okay. So now we can close our render view, our render settings. And then we're gonna go to the rendering menu. So remember how we can switch menus over here on the top left? We can switch to the rendering menu. And then under the word render, we're gonna go to batch render option box. Okay, so in the rendering menu, we're gonna go to render, batch render option box. Render, batch render option box. All right, so what happens? So when we hit this button, Maya opens up, it takes our file and it sends it to this other program called Maya Batch. And Maya Batch is what's gonna render our stuff out. Now, the processors inside the computer, those are the things that actually do like all the calculations. Those are what are gonna do all the work for us, okay? So if we had one processor in our station, it would go a lot slower than if we had 80 processors in our station. These ones have, to the computer, they have 8 processors, okay? So when we go to render, batch render, and go to that option box, we're telling it that we want to change how many render threads we have, okay? Threads and processors for the computer is essentially the same thing. These have 8, but Maya can be stupid sometimes, and we have to uncheck this box and tell it we have 12. That way we get a compromise and we actually get 8. I don't know how this works, it just does, okay? So render, batch render option box, we uncheck this auto render threads, and then we set this to 12. You're in the wrong menu. Go to here and choose rendering. There you go. And then you can go to render, batch render option box. Okay, so we hit auto render threads off, and we change this to 12, and then we hit batch render and close. So you see the little running man in the bottom right corner, way over here. Don't click on the running man. We're going to click below him to the semicolon window area. So way on the bottom right, there's a semicolon on a piece of paper. We click that. There we go. Okay, and you can maximize this window that comes up. So you can click the middle maximize button, and it'll make it bigger. So this is the script editor, and everything we do inside Maya is basically output to this window. So just so you can see it, if I scrolled upwards, all the stuff that I've done inside of Maya as far as changing settings have actually been like sent here, sent to the script editor so that that's where it processes it. This is now showing us where our rendering is at. So right now it says percentage of rendering done, 35. That's 35% of frame number 2, okay? So again, this is gonna take, because we already figured it out, about 2 hours. As we get closer to our scene or further away, obviously that's going to affect our render time. If we're really close to an object and there's nothing else in it, not very long. But as we zoom out and we see this entire city, it's gonna take a lot longer to do, okay? So we're gonna let this thing go, and we can come back to it at another time and put it all together. Now, as this is going, let's say I'm not done. I'm not happy with this, or I want to see what it looks like. Because I don't even know what this is going to look like. So what I want to do is go to my computer and find my file. So I'm just going to go into my computer and find my folder. Notice how mine's going into my correct folder, Sarcona Mini Room Images. That's where it should be going. We'll also notice how slow our computer is going, okay? Because our computer is using all 8 processors, it doesn't have enough processing power to even open up a window. That's why this is going so slow. So one of the things we'll need to do is after we start it rendering is we right-click in the task manager, okay? So, or a task bar. This little bar on the bottom is a task bar. So right-click in the task bar and go to Start Task Manager. Okay. once you open up the task manager, this lists in the processes tab, not the applications, the processes tab, it lists all the stuff that's happening inside your computer. I'm going to find the Maya batch one and right click and say set priority below normal. All right, so what that's going to do is say, hey Maya, you're rendering, that's cool, but I want to do other stuff. So my stuff takes priority over whatever you're doing. Okay, so now I should be able to go to the P drive and you can see how quick it's going. Go here, go to work, Monday, Wednesday. And this should be inside your images folder. If your stuff isn't in your images folder, then you did something wrong. Probably didn't set your project. So now I can double click on one of my files and it'll open a program called DJV. There it is. And what it's doing, I had to hit the stop button, is it's cycling through. It's showing me frame 1, 2, 3. And then 4 isn't done yet. So that's where I'm getting this little black blip at the end. Right there. Okay? So as I click and drag, you can kind of see, it's hard to see a little bit, you can kind of see how the camera's moving. Okay? So I actually do have an animation in here. I'm rendering the right camera because it's animated. Everything looks good. So I'm happy with it. So I can close that window. And then if I'm ready to just let it go, I'll let the computer go and just let it do whatever it's doing. All right. So if for some chance we're like, you know what, I'm not happy with the way that rendering looked. Thank you. If you're not happy with the way the rendering looked, you can go back to render and you can say cancel my batch render. You can make your changes. Like I don't want this thing here. I want this to be up higher. Actually, I want 2 or 3. There we go. Okay. So I add as many things as I want into my scene. I don't want my coffee cup floating. I'm going to put it on the desk. It's a lot of coffee. There we go. All right. So there we go. So now I've made my changes. All I have to do is go back to render. I don't even need to go to the option box anymore because it's already set. I just go to batch render. And what Maya will do is it'll go back and it'll, not there, and it will, stop closing windows and then that'll be a lot easier. It'll just overwrite my files. So number 1, which was rendered, it'll just overwrite number 1 with the new one, number 2 with the new one. So what could happen sometimes is you can get all the way through your entire animation and realize, whoops, wrong camera, or the lights were off, or something was randomly hidden, or whatever. 20,000 things could go wrong with your rendering. So you just fix it, batch render again, and it should go into the right spot. Okay. Now, if this didn't go inside your images, what that means is that you never set your project. Okay, because when we set our project, we're telling Maya, this is what we're working on. Make sure you save the stuff into these locations. So had I accidentally clicked, like say, the Tuesday Thursday mini room, my files would go into the Tuesday Thursday mini room's images folder. Or whoever's in the class before you, if they had their project set, it would go into theirs. So Tuesday Thursday, someone already did that where they're saving their stuff into someone else's folder. All right, so I'm going to go back to my performance here, go back to my batch and just set this to below normal. Perfect. All right. So every time, batch render, set your priority below normal. Batch render, set priority below normal. That way you can work. And what that does is it just allows whoever's on the computer to have priority. And when they're not doing anything, then Maya will take over. And when they are doing something, that they can still do it without affecting anyone else on the computer. Okay?